That night, the sound of rain echoed through the old house like a whisper from the past. I remember standing in the doorway, my heart pounding as I looked at him. My father-in-law, the man I once feared, now standing there, soaked from the storm, holding a worn-out toolbox in his hand. I never imagined we would be doing this together. But life has a strange way of testing the bonds we think are already broken. So before you judge me, listen until the end. Because what happened that night wasn't what you think. My name is Amelia. And for 2 years I avoided my father-in-law Richard. Not because he hurt me. Not because he was cruel. But because he reminded me too much of my husband, his son Daniel. Daniel passed away 2 years ago. His death left a silence so heavy, it pressed against every wall of this house. His coffee mug still sits in the kitchen. His books remain stacked in the living room. His jacket still hangs by the door. I couldn't move them. I couldn't breathe without feeling him. Richard tried to visit. He would call sometimes. Leave quiet messages. But every time I saw him, my chest tightened. He had Daniel's eyes. The same half-smile. The same way of standing with one hand on his hip when he was thinking. It was unbearable. So I stayed away. Until the storm came. It was a Saturday evening when the roof started leaking again. The same spot Daniel always promised to fix but never did. I stood on a chair, holding a bucket, watching the water drip into it. Slow, steady, impossible to ignore. Then there was a knock at the door. And everything began to change. When I opened the door, Richard stood there drenched in rain, his gray hair plastered to his forehead, his coat heavy with water. In his hand was that old, scratched toolbox I hadn't seen in years. "I heard you still haven't fixed that roof," he said gently. "Thought maybe we could do it together." For a moment, I almost told him no. The storm outside was loud, but the one inside my chest was louder. Every instinct told me to close the door, to protect the fragile peace I had built around my grief. But the water was still dripping upstairs. And I was tired of holding the bucket alone. "Okay," I whispered. We climbed into the attic with a flashlight between us. The air smelled damp and heavy. The wooden beams above us were old. Daniel and Richard had installed them years ago, laughing and arguing over measurements. Now the laughter was gone. Richard knelt down and examined the damage. His movements careful and steady despite the cold. "It's worse than I thought," he muttered. I forced a small smile. "That sounds about right." For a while we worked without speaking. Just the sound of rain on the roof and the soft clink of tools passing between us. Then he stopped. "You don't talk much anymore," he said quietly, not looking at me. I swallowed. There hasn't been much to say. Silence settled between us again. Then he set the hammer down. "You think I don't miss him every day?" His voice cracked just slightly. "You think I don't blame myself for not being a better father?" The words hit harder than the thunder outside. I hadn't expected that. Not from him. Not tonight. "I never blamed you," I said softly. "I just didn't know how to be around you without seeing him." For the first time in 2 years, we were finally saying the things we'd both been carrying. And the roof above us kept leaking. As if waiting to see what we would do next. Richard nodded slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans like he needed something to do with them. "Then let's fix it," he said. "The roof. And maybe something else too." The beam we needed to replace was massive. Dark with water damage. Heavy in a way that felt almost symbolic. We tried lifting it together. It didn't move. Richard let out a quiet chuckle. "Guess it's too big for one person." Something in me cracked at that. "Maybe that's the point," I said. So we adjusted our grip. Counted to 3. Lifted again. This time it shifted. Not much, just enough. We worked for hours after that. Passing tools. Holding flashlights. Breathing through memories neither of us dared to fully name. At one point, my foot slipped on the damp wood. Before I could fall, his hand caught my arm, firm, steady. For a second, time froze. Not in a romantic way. Not in some dramatic, cinematic way. Just human. 2 people who loved the same man. 2 people trying to keep something from collapsing. When we finally secured the new beam in place, I sank down onto the attic floor, exhausted. My arms ached. My chest did too. Richard sat beside me, staring at the rain tapping softly above us. He would have been proud of you, he said. I swallowed. You think so? I know so. And that's when the tears came. Not the quiet ones I'd gotten used to. Not the silent ones I hid in the shower. These were messy, shaking, real. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer advice. He just stayed. And somehow, that was enough. The roof stopped leaking after that night. But something else had changed too. The house didn't feel as cold. Richard started coming by once a week. Not in a heavy way. Not forcing conversation. Just showing up. We fixed small things. The creaky staircase Daniel always meant to tighten. The broken garden fence leaning sideways in the wind. The rusted mailbox that hadn't closed properly in years. Each repair felt simple on the surface. But underneath, something deeper was happening. We weren't just fixing wood and nails. We were rebuilding the spaces grief had hollowed out. One afternoon, while we sanded down the porch railing, Richard started telling me stories about Daniel I had never heard before. How he once skipped school to help a stray dog find its owner. How he tried to build a birdhouse as a teenager and accidentally nailed his own shirt to the wall. I laughed harder than I had in 2 years. And Richard laughed too. That same half-smile. But this time it didn't hurt as much to see it. Months later, on Daniel's birthday, we decided to repaint the porch. It was something he had always planned to do, but never found the time for. As we worked, I noticed Richard's hands trembling slightly. You okay? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, just old memories sneaking up again. Without thinking, I placed my hand over his. Then let's make new ones, I said. He looked at me, warmth, sorrow, pride all tangled together, and nodded. By the time the sun began to set, the porch looked brighter than I remembered. We sat side by side, watching the paint dry, the world finally quiet. It's beautiful, I said. He smiled softly. He'd like it. That night, before going to bed, I stopped in front of Daniel's photograph. I think we're doing okay now, I whispered. And for the first time in years, I believed it. What happened between my father-in-law and me wasn't dramatic. It wasn't forbidden. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't what people might assume when they hear a story like this. It was something much simpler. 2 people carrying the same grief. Finally deciding not to carry it alone. I used to think healing meant moving on. Packing away the photos. Clearing out the closet. Learning how to say his name without breaking. But I was wrong. Healing wasn't about erasing Daniel. It was about letting him exist in the room without the silence swallowing us whole. That night in the storm didn't just fix a roof. It reminded me that pain shared becomes lighter. That love doesn't disappear. It changes shape. And sometimes the people we avoid are the ones who understand our pain the most. If I hadn't opened that door, I might still be standing on that chair, holding a bucket alone. So tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have opened the door? Or would you have let the storm pass by? A year has passed since that storm. The roof still holds. The porch paint has faded just a little under the sun, but the boards are steady, strong. Richard still comes by every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes we fix things. Sometimes we just sit. We drink coffee from mismatched mugs and talk about Daniel. Not in whispers anymore, not like his name might shatter something fragile. Now his stories feel warm instead of sharp. There are still hard days. Days when the house feels too quiet. Days when the air feels heavier than it should. But I've learned something important. Grief doesn't disappear. It changes. It softens when it's shared. And love, real love, doesn't end with a goodbye. It echoes in the people who remain. Sometimes I think about that night and how close I was to not opening the door. How easy it would have been to pretend I wasn't home. How different everything might have been. The storm didn't come to destroy us. It came to bring us back to each other. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting. Not replacing. Just learning how to stand under the rain and lift the weight together.